Energy systems are what power your muscles and are absolutely central to sports preparation, whether you play an intense fast sport like American football or take part in longer events like road cycling or marathon training. In this video, I'll share the 3 stubborn myths about energy systems that just won't go away, why they're wrong, and at the end of the video, I'll share 4 easy guidelines to improve your conditioning that apply to all levels and all sports. So let's start with this first energy system myth, and we often hear that energy systems are duration specific, and you've probably seen that same graph that I learned when I started coaching many years ago, more than 10 years ago. So typically we say that the anaerobic alactic system or the phosphocreatine system is in action in the first few seconds. So that's going to be the system that you need if you want to perform short, high intensity efforts. Then we have what some call the glycolytic system or the anaerobic lactic system, which goes from 20 seconds to about 2 minutes. And so that's the kind of effort that hurts. So it's kind of a sprint, but a long sprint. It's really hard. And often we hear that you shouldn't do any of that kind of training. I'll come back on this after and tell you why I don't think that's the right way of framing things. And then finally, we have the aerobic system, which works through your mitochondria. And this includes efforts over 2 minutes. So I'll come back on all of those myths after we go through them and give you a few solutions and a few corrections on what we currently understand about energy systems. So the second myth that we often hear is that training the aerobic system interferes with speed and power development. So typically we hear that if you do any kind of endurance or aerobic training, you're going to get slow, you're going to get tired, and that you should avoid that kind of training at all costs, especially if you want to perform in a high intensity sport such as American football with very short work intervals, pretty long rest intervals, even during the games. And essentially, you should avoid all type of endurance training. And we'll get back to this in a second. And the third one is that your training energy system needs to look like your sport. And here we often use the word or hear the word being used as specificity, and we'll look at why I think this is wrong today. So you would typically say, you train for a short, intense sport like American football. So those efforts are 5 seconds and below. So we need to train our phosphocreatine system. Or on the other side, if you're training for example, trail running, and you're doing a long distance, many hours, then you should just train your aerobic system. And we'll go back to each one of those myths now and give a few updates, a few corrections on this. So let's start with that first myth: energy systems are duration specific. And here is why I think that this doesn't actually work. This graph, in my opinion, is very misleading, and it's a misrepresentation of what is going on. And we shouldn't see this as a timeline and a sequencing of all systems. And why am I saying this? Based on our current understanding of how the body works, we know today that, for example, all energy systems are actually active within 150 milliseconds of a muscle contraction. What this means is as soon as you contract a muscle or a muscle fiber, all those energy systems that live inside of the muscle fiber are going to be active to contribute to the energetic process that is providing enough ATP for the contraction itself, for the relaxation, for putting calcium back where it belongs, and bringing enough oxygen into the mitochondria. All those systems are active together. And now we can go even a little bit deeper and see how those different systems interact with each other. If we think about phosphocreatine and oxygen, we can see here that phosphocreatine is known as the quickest form of regeneration of ATP. And we also see that contractile activity is interrupted when phosphocreatine is depleted, despite the levels of ATP being reduced by only 20%. So there's still a lot of ATP in the muscle cell, but the contraction isn't happening anymore when phosphocreatine is no longer there. So obviously, muscle contractions are interrupted when the concentration of phosphocreatine is reduced. Okay, so that we can kind of bank, and we can move on to the next slide. And in this one, what we learn is that the resynthesis of creatine phosphate is related to the availability of oxygen. So if we look through the lines here, the resynthesis of creatine phosphate during a recovery normally occurs rapidly, but is totally inhibited if the local circulation to the muscle is occluded. An occlusion means you're going to have some kind of compression of the blood vessels, and so the fresh or the oxygenated blood will not be able to reach the muscle, and the initial phase, the initial fast phase of phosphocreatine resynthesis is limited by the availability of oxygen. And so we could summarize this by saying that phosphocreatine resynthesis depends on available oxygen. So that already puts a wrench in this whole discourse about duration and energy systems, because phosphocreatine, yes, it's an energetic buffer. Yes, it's what's highly available in the muscle cell when you're at rest. Yes, it's what is used first, but it doesn't work in isolation. And actually, you have a constant replenishment of phosphocreatine through your quote unquote aerobic system. We can see this through those different graphs that are taken from different studies, and that essentially show the tight relationship that we know exists between phosphocreatine levels inside the muscle and also concentration of oxygen available. And we can go one step further and actually establish that link directly, and it's something that we call the phosphocreatine shuttle, right? And what we see here is that high energy phosphate is transferred from the ATP formed by the means of oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria production site to creatine via the action of mitochondrial creatine kinase, thus regenerating phosphocreatine and ADP, right? So what we can understand from this is that the mitochondria inside your muscle cell, the mitochondria is inside almost every single cell inside your body. It's the reason you live and breathe, literally, because the oxygen that you breathe in almost exclusively goes into your mitochondria in the different cells of your body. And they exist inside your muscle cells as well. That mitochondria uses the oxygen. It puts ATP back together, right? It takes ADP or AMP and then puts phosphate back on and creates or recycles ATP. And that ATP is then shuttled out to the cytosol of the cell, and there will contribute to putting phosphocreatine back together. Right? So if we continue reading on the bottom right, by means of this shuttle system, phosphocreatine performs another important function. It participates in the transfer of high energy phosphate present in ATP from mitochondria to cytosol. So we have that direct link in the way of the phosphocreatine shuttle between the inside of the mitochondria and the quote unquote aerobic system that uses oxygen with the electron transport chain or electron transport system, depending on how we want to call it, and phosphocreatine, which is supposed to be that anaerobic alactic, right? And sure, if we look in isolation to the chemical reaction of phosphocreatine, there's no oxygen involved. But the body doesn't work like this. You don't just have phosphocreatine in one compartment and then oxygen in another one. They work together inside the muscle cell, everything under 150 milliseconds. And we can even go one step further and look at this seminal study from George Brooks and colleagues from a couple years back that really reinforces the link between glycolytic metabolism, so the use of sugars, and lactate and oxidative metabolism. As you see in the graph at the bottom right here, lactate is at the intersection between glycolytic metabolism, so the fact of using sugars, glycolysis or anaerobic lactic system, as some call it, and then the oxidative metabolism. What we have to understand here is that you take sugars, you break them down. That happens inside the cytosol of your cells, and the end product of glycolysis is typically lactate. That lactate is a byproduct of metabolism. It's actually a half sugar. And what you can do after this is you can shuttle that lactate out into the bloodstream and go and use it somewhere else, go and turn it back into sugars through the liver, or use it inside the mitochondria, right? The lactate can go inside the mitochondria and be turned back into pyruvate and then be used in the Krebs cycle. And then the byproducts of this, NADH, FADH2, go into the electron transport chain, and then oxygen gets used there, and then the proton gradient gets created, and then ATP synthase pushes out ATP. This is a really kind of quick summary of how all this happens, but lactate plays a role in the functioning of your aerobic system as well. So we have to stop thinking that energy systems work in isolation and energy systems work in sequence in time. No, they all work together and they all contribute to your muscles working. The second myth that we're tackling, training the aerobic system interferes with speed and power development. So let's look at this. So we often hear again that if you do endurance training, if you do aerobic training and train your aerobic system, you're going to get slow. But what you have to understand in order to bust that myth is that we have different muscle fiber types inside the body. If we want to simplify it, we can say there's two categories. There's slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers. And we call them that way because the slow twitch contract slowly and the fast twitch contract more quickly. They actually produce about the same force on contraction, but because the fast twitch contracts faster, it actually produces more power. Okay, it's a more powerful type of contraction, and we can simplify things and say that slow twitch are more endurant, and fast twitch are faster at contracting and produce more power. And we can go one step farther, and we can distinguish three different categories: the type 1 fibers, which are the slow twitch, and then we have the type 2A and the type 2X. And those are both considered to be fast twitch fibers. And essentially, the more you go to the right, the bigger the muscle fiber itself, the more contractile elements inside the fiber it contains. So we're talking about the actin, myosin filaments, the things that actually grip together and pull and make the muscle fiber contract. Whereas the slow twitch fiber, the type 1 fiber, has less contractile elements, but has a lot more mitochondria. And we can simplify by saying that, again, slow twitch fibers have more mitochondria, are more enduring, and the fast twitch fibers have more contractile elements. Thus, they're more powerful, but they're less energy efficient. And now we can go one step farther, and that's going to actually get us to a concept that's really important, in my opinion. It's on the next slide. What we understand is that muscle fibers are organized in motor units. A motor unit, you see one on the right here, it's the neuron, the axon, and all the muscle fibers that are attached. And when you turn on, quote unquote, that motor unit, when you have that electrical impulse that starts from the central nervous system and that kind of triggers and activates that motor unit, all the muscle fibers that are attached to it will contract. And the way that the body does this is through what is called the Henneman size principle. And this size principle applies in most cases. Yes, there are exceptions that we know of now, but for time's sake and simplicity's sake, let's just remember that your body will start by recruiting small motor units, which are typically attached to slow twitch fibers. And the higher the force demand of the activity, and the bigger the motor unit will be recruited, and the fast twitch fibers are typically attached to those but bigger motor units. So you can see here, red motor units are the small motor units, which are typically composed of slow twitch fibers. And in blue, you have the large motor units, which are typically attached to fast twitch fibers. So it's true to say that when you do a long duration, low intensity activity, maybe like trail running, or maybe some ultra cycling, you will be primarily recruiting and fatiguing your slow twitch fibers. And it's also true to say that when you do more sprint-like activities, you're going to be recruiting and fatiguing your fast twitch fibers. And what's great is that we understand how those muscle fibers adapt to exercise. There's this great study that came out last year that's called Need for Speed: Human Fast Twitch Mitochondria Favor Power Over Efficiency. And it essentially explains, and I highly recommend you go and check out this study. It's in open access, if I'm not mistaken. And the big takeaway of this study is that we have those slow twitch fibers, we have those fast twitch fibers, and those different types of muscle fibers adapt differently to exercise. And what you can understand is that fast twitch fibers, as I said before, have less mitochondria. They have about 3 times less mitochondria than the slow twitch fibers, but they compensate by essentially functioning a little bit differently. So there's less mitochondria in terms of volume inside the cell, but those mitochondria have been optimized to use more oxygen, right? And you can see this on this graph here. And the small quote, fast twitch mitochondria expressed double the ATP synthase, that's the complex 5 in the respiratory chain of the mitochondria. So double the ATP synthase levels of mitochondria in slow twitch fibers. So essentially, they can produce ATP faster through the respiratory chain because they have a bigger density of those different of those complexes. And to go one step farther, and I really want to highlight this because it does bring things together with what we said before concerning that second myth that training your aerobic system is going to have a negative impact on your speed and power qualities. What we understand here, and that's at the end of that study, they say that a metabolic state may be occurring at the onset of anaerobic respiration, where the fast and slow twitch fibers exchange lactate for succinate to favor their respective electron transport chain composition. The succinate from slow twitch fibers could then act as a substrate for fast twitch fibers tailored towards succinate oxidation. Thus, and that's the important sentence to take away here, fast and slow twitch fibers might exchange lactate and succinate, so they essentially trade substrates during heavy exercise to symbiotically favor their respective predispositions toward complex 1 or complex 2 respiration. In simple terms, what this means is that your muscle fibers work together. Okay? There is no isolation of this one works over here, this one works over there. If you want to talk about lactate, for example, fast twitch fibers during a high intensity activity will produce lactate. Well, guess what recycles that lactate? It's the slow twitch fibers. As we see here, they trade substrates. Okay, so training your aerobic quote unquote system, which we can understand as training your slow twitch fibers, will actually come support your fast twitch fibers during your high intensity activities. And we'll actually see that in the next myth that we're tackling right now. So training energy systems needs to look like your sport. So let's go through this. We talked about this. Some people say that if you're competing in a short high intensity sport, that's what your training needs to look like, and you need to train that specific energy system. And if you do something long and low intensity, you need to train that system. But again, we saw in this presentation that all systems work together. We cannot pull them apart. We cannot just train one or just train the other. As soon as you contract the muscle, all three systems are active. And what I want to pull up for you here is this really interesting study that looked at repeat sprint ability in soccer players. And the way they tested this is they did a short, intense sprint. I think it was 20 or 30 meters all out. And they looked at the time, and that's obviously the speed that the athlete was able to express. Then they had a short break, and they repeated this test or this sprint multiple times, 6 times, I think, in this study. And what they consider to be a good repeat sprint ability is essentially when the decrease in speed is less as you go through your 6 repetitions. So essentially, if you're moderately or if you're very fast on the first one, but you're super slow on the 6th one, then your repeat sprint ability isn't great. But if your first one is really fast and then the 6th one is still pretty close to that first one, you have a good ability to repeat sprints. And I think that's a good illustration of what we talked about from the beginning here. And for those that think that to get better at repeating sprints of short duration, that you need to just do more sprints, let's look at what they actually found in this study. They looked at different parameters or different measures of aerobic fitness, VO2 max, lactate thresholds, and those other concepts. And they looked at which ones could explain the best results in this repeat sprint ability test. And what they found is that in this little table you can see here, and again, I recommend you go check out those studies for yourself, read them, and try to get the information for yourself. And what they found here is that the 2 parameters that explained the performance on the repeat sprint ability test the best was fastest time. So essentially your max speed. So we could take max speed or max power as parameter number 1. And the second one, as you see down here, is VOBLA, which means the speed at the second threshold. OBLA is the onset of blood lactate accumulation. And in this study, that's how they coined the second lactate threshold or second threshold, which is the transition between medium intensity and high intensity, if we talk in endurance terms. So essentially, if you take your people that had the fastest time, so the best speed, plus the highest second threshold, these people had the best results in repeat sprint ability. So what does that tell us? If we put that on a graph here, and what you see are what we call intensity domains, you have the low in green, the medium in yellow, the high in red, and the very high in purple, is that repeat sprint ability performance was highly correlated to two factors: your max speed on the very right, because that's the highest speed you can express in the shortest time span, and OBLA, which is your second threshold. And what's interesting is that to train your max speed, you need to obviously sprint. And this quality, physiologically speaking, is improved by increasing the oxygen utilization in your fast twitch fibers. So you need to train your fast twitch fibers. You need to train by doing more sprints. But then if you want to be able to repeat those sprints, you need to also train your slow twitch fibers. Because your second threshold is, amongst other things, improved by increasing the oxygen delivery to your slow twitch fibers, right? And so you can think of it that way. The sprint itself empties the tank, uses all the oxygen that's available there. Remember that your fast twitch fibers also use oxygen. They actually use more oxygen per mitochondria than your slow twitch fibers, as we saw from the study before. So the fast twitch fibers use the oxygen, and then the slow twitch fibers come and fill up that tank again so you can repeat those activities. So you might be asking yourself, what training should you actually be doing? And here's a solution with 4 very simple guidelines for you. First of all, understand what you're looking at here. We call this the intensity spectrum. This is what you're going to find in all endurance physiology or endurance performance studies. There's low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity, and very high intensity. And you see the approximate time that you can hold those different types of efforts. And here are the 4 points. The first one is that you should train all endurance qualities throughout the year. No matter what your sport is, if you want to have a balanced approach to training, you should train. Sometimes you should do some low intensity, sometimes there's some medium intensity, sometimes there's some high intensity, sometimes there's some very high intensity. And obviously that's going to depend on your sport. It's going to depend on your season. It's going to depend on your profile and what you need. So the second point is train general qualities away from competition. For example, you're training for marathons. When you're away from your marathon season, do improve your max strength. It's not going to make you a better marathon runner necessarily, even though we know that there's some running economy considerations and some plyometric considerations. But without even going into the weeds on that, being strong is just going to make you more durable over time. And what we want is to be generalists first and then specialists second, right? So train general qualities away from competition. If you only do, slow speed, low intensity activities, such as ultra distance running, I would highly consider doing some sprints in the off season. Do some uphill sprints, do some sprints on a bike, something that's secure that you can do safely, but train all the qualities, okay? And then obviously train specific qualities close to competition. So you want to be good at doing some high intensity efforts for your CrossFit competition. Do more CrossFit closer to your competition, okay? But also remember that the best training is the one you've never done, right? Beginner gains are real. And if you've never done any endurance training, guess what? You're going to benefit greatly from adding some endurance training into your routine. Obviously, if you're an American football player, don't add in the low intensity the 2 days before your first game in the season. That might not be the best time to include that type of training. But maybe you want to do some low intensity in the preseason. Maybe you could do that on the bike. Maybe you can build a bit of volume so that when you get to the training camps and when you get to the actual regular season, you have the capacity to recover. You have the capacity to train for your sport. And like we saw before, you are going to help your sprints and you are going to be able to better repeat your sprints if you follow those guidelines and if you build your endurance. Thanks for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I just have one thing to ask. If you enjoyed this slideshow, please share this video with someone around you that is interested in those concepts. Also, if you want to go a little bit deeper on conditioning, I created a 4-video guide for you. Just click the first link in the description to sign up. It's free and you can watch those videos, learn a little bit more about endurance and conditioning, and apply those pieces of advice to your own training.